Hi everyone, welcome back to Bodhi Tree Buddhism, the way to Buddhahood. Yes, today is the first day that we're switching to the Saturday schedule. So I think I mentioned it last week or the week before, so I hope that hasn't caught anyone out. Anyway, you can watch this after the fact, it doesn't have to be live. So we're continuing on today with reading The Way to Buddhahood, Changfo Zidao, by the contemporary Chinese Buddhist master and scholar, Venerable Master In Shun. Where are we up to today? That's the question. We are on this section talking about the Dharma, the practices common to basically all goals or structures for Buddhist practice, whether or not one is a Mahayana practitioner, whether one just simply wants to practice the Dharma for happiness in this life and doesn't really think far beyond that. It doesn't matter. That's the material we're covering these last few weeks. We've talked about right view, particularly the idea about karma, action, and the fact that actions, intentional actions, lead to results. But then, I think it was last week, we started with the practices themselves. But do remember this kind of, sometimes people present it like this sort of dichotomy or this like contrast between theory and practice, and they'll say, well, you have to practice, theory is useless without the practice. But remember, theory is actually still part of the practice. Making sure you understand correctly is something you need to do, and as something you do, it's something you practice. Anyway, we're past all that, and now we are up to practices. And so I think maybe we'll begin with just going back and having a little look at, I think I need to kind of go back a verse or two here. Here we go. We were talking about then the threefold meritorious action, so this idea of merit and that there are three basic types of merit. They are in turn giving or generosity or charity, whichever term you want to use there. Dana is the term in Sanskrit and Pali. The second one is ethics for lay practitioners, basically the 5 precepts, but there's also other structures like the 8 one-day fasting precepts. And then the third one is what I call like basic mental development, or we could say basic level meditation. So these are the 3. And just remember, as we mentioned last time, this whole idea of merit is really not that tricky. Merit just means wholesome karma. Wholesome karma. That's it. Simple stuff. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the introduction last week, and now we are up to the section talking about giving. Now we've got 3 verses for the meritorious action of giving. 45, 46, and 47. Let's see if we can get through them today. Maybe not. No rush. Okay, verse number 45. 依资具得乐，依师得子具，故佛为众生显赞不是福。Based on resources, one attains happiness. Based on giving, one attains resources. Therefore, for sentient beings, the Buddha first praised the merit of giving. Okay, so just to clarify a couple of the slightly technical terms here, they're not very technical. This one here, 资具, which I've translated as resources. I think I've mentioned this a bit earlier, translated it. There's another term in Chinese that's commonly used called 资粮. Liang is literally like grains. So this idea of sort of like resources or requisites or provisions. There's this Chinese term called dao liang, which is literally like the food that you take when you are traveling. So, and of course traveling on the dao, on the path, is then of course the term that we use for the practice of the Dharma. So it kind of means the resources that you've got while you're on the path. Here it's a slightly different term. So the ju usually means like tools, but can also be like resources, anything. So if you imagine, let's take this metaphor, this simile of you're going hiking. So you've got your backpack on. Of course, what have you got in your backpack? You've got your clothes. You've probably got some little cooker. You've got food. Certainly hope you've got food. You've probably got some other things. You might have pocket knife. You might have a little, I don't know, some other utensils that you use, etc., etc. Extra pairs of socks. That kind of stuff, right? Your sunscreen, bug repellent. All these things are the nyuzi. They're things that you need so that you can successfully traverse the path. If you don't have those, I mean, you can walk very lightly without any backpack, become nightfall or bad weather, if you don't have anything to protect you, you can't continue on the path, right? So the idea is the same. In order to continue successfully on the path safely, you've got to have these resources with you. Where do the resources come from? They come from giving or generosity. When we give and share to others, the result of that is we receive in turn. Now remember, it's not that we give X amount, we get back X amount. It's not that simple. But it's a basic principle. If we are generous with food, we will receive food in turn, etc. I mean, you can even think about this basic concept. I'm sure you know people. Some people are just like super generous with something in particular. Maybe some people are really generous with their clothing. They have a huge wardrobe, but they also like love to share their stuff. Maybe it's like a older sister or a brother or an older cousin or something, and they're always sharing clothes with the younger siblings or younger other cousins. And in turn, it kind of promotes this like cycle of people giving to them all the time. And they just happen to have a huge amount, partly through their generosity. So it's a similar idea. And so here also, of course, these resources, these requisites, and not just things we need on the path, I mean, they're things just to survive in daily life as well, right? I mean, we talk about, even in modern ideas of like human rights, you have the human right to like food, clothing, shelter, transport, right? Without those things, life is pretty painful. I mean, life's difficult enough, even if we do have these things. But these are absolutely essential for even just basic happiness in life, right? So the idea being that in order to be happy, we need material resources. Material resources in turn come from generosity, and therefore the Buddha places the merit of giving at the foremost. That's like the kind of rudimentary teaching that the Buddha would give to many lay audiences. And there's one thing you kind of got to notice, well, not really notice, but one thing you should know when you read like a lot of Buddhist sutras. Let's say if you want to sit down, you want to read early Buddhist scripture, the Nikayas or the Agamas, you know, there's a huge amount of teachings, and you'll think that like, if you like literally sit down and read through all of those, the vast majority of the Buddha either talking to monks and nuns, or maybe other religious people, not many, I mean there definitely are some, but not many to lay audiences, particularly large lay audiences. But if you read a text like the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, so this is talking about the parinibbana, it's not the death, it's not the technically right term, but the last months of the Buddha's life. And it covers, it's a big sutra, it covers like quite a few months actually. And it's really interesting because it goes through, and then the Buddha traveled to this town and he gave Dharma teachings to everyone, blah, blah, blah. And then he goes on to there's no detail at all. It just sort of like sums up. I'd imagine the Buddha's probably teaching for hours to these local people that would come in. And it's just summarized in like a sentence or two. So while the sutras have a lot of detail about all the technical nitty gritty of, you know, higher levels of spiritual cultivation, I think that's partly because often when he was teaching to lay audiences, they were probably pretty generic stuff and they didn't go into a lot of detail in the recording that we now have preserved, but it was hugely important. This is the basic thing that the Buddha would teach regular lay audiences. Generosity. It's always the first like meritorious act, the first virtuous deed that we can do. Okay, now we're going to go into some more details about that. Oh, I need to switch back to the text here. Okay, so let's talk about some details now. Whoop, I need to go up. I'm going to trying to get it all on the right page. Come on, computer. Okay, so verse 46. 施以舍以利 有悲有经别 心田事不同 功德分生裂 Giving is through relinquishing and through benefiting, distinguished by compassion and by respect. From the differences of mental state, the field and the gift, the merit can be distinguished as superior or inferior. Now this is a really pithy verse here. There's like, it's sort of taking some really dense things and just like bullet pointing them, so to speak. A bit like how we were talking about karma before. And so we need to definitely unpack this. Okay, one of the first ones is a bit like a definition of what giving is. So whether we call it giving or generosity or charity, I think these terms are all fine. Just kind of depends on the context. Giving in English and generosity are not quite the same, right? Generosity, we usually take it in the sense of like some sort of poorer recipient, whereas giving can be a bit different. You know, you can give Christmas presents to your friends, that's still giving, but we wouldn't call it charity. But one of the two main features of it are relinquishing and benefiting. So relinquishing means that we have something, we possess something, and we are giving it away. Like, originally this thing belongs to me, and after I give it, it no longer belongs to me. It's not mine anymore. I'm able to give it up. And one aspect of that, an important side here, is that also means we have to overcome our own attachment to that in order to be able to relinquish it, to be able to give it away. And that's quite important in itself, even if it doesn't benefit the other person. There are a couple of stories in Buddhism, like there's this famous story in the Chan school, and you also see it in early Indian Buddhism as well, of like people who are bound by their wealth. So they own a lot of things and they're very attached to it, and they realize they're attached to it, and they realize that's a hindrance. So they want to get rid of those possessions, but they just dump it, like dump it in a river. Now, this is in a way good because it helps them overcome their attachment, but in a way it's not so good because like they could be used to benefit someone else. Like, and you could relinquish it and benefit someone else is better than just you abandoning it and giving up your own like attachment to it. But relinquishing is an important factor. You have to be able to like let go of that before it can be counted as giving. So it's not loaning, right? Loaning is not giving. But when I actually teach generosity, I do sometimes talk about loaning and borrowing as almost like a primary form. Even being willing to like loan something to someone is still better than just clinging onto it ourselves, right? The second thing is benefit. So that what you're giving up has to be of benefit to that other person as well. It can't be something that's, and there's a bit of a debate, you know, if that's something that's harmful to people. You often get this question, you know, homeless people, you know, begging for food, and you'll find some people, I say quite stingy people, they'll be like, oh, don't give money to homeless people, you know, they're only going to spend it on drugs. I mean, they might go and spend it on drugs, but that kind of assumption itself, I actually think a lot of the time that's just it's a nice excuse for people to then think, like, so I'm not going to give it to them. And not so good. But there is a bit of a debate, you know, if you're going to give that to that person and they do use it on drugs, is that, you know, how is that helpful to them? But I think taking that whole conversation about like giving to, say, homeless people and turning it all about drugs often misses the point. I'd say 99% of that, they're not. They need it for other things, for food and for basic necessities. And if you have a problem with them using it on something harmful, then buy them food and give them food. Nothing's stopping you from doing that, right? Okay, the bit of this idea, so it has to be of kind of like of some benefit to that person. It's not that you're taking something and you're like dumping it on them. Like, you know, I've got, I don't know, something kind of useless and I've got a lot of it, and then I'm just going to like give it to someone. It doesn't do anything for them and it's actually just a burden for them because now they have to deal with it. That's not giving. Okay. The second line is distinguished by compassion and by respect. Now, these are two types. Often this is a term that's used for the field. We're going to talk about the field in line 3 there. You can see the mental state, the field, and the gift. So the field is a term that refers to the recipient. And so there's two basic types. One kind of recipient is out of compassion. So when you see someone's like suffering, and somebody in need, and you give to them, that is the field of compassion. That's kind of more like what we talk about of most forms of like charity, right? You hear about some, okay, so like in my case, I have a bit of contact still with some of my African connections from my time in South Africa in the Amitofo Care Centre. They have various orphanages around southern Africa, Malawi, Lesotho, Swaziland. Recently they've started one in Madagascar. And so you hear these kids, the orphan kids, they need these resources. So we make a donation to the Amitabha Care Centre. That is then an action out for the field of compassion. The second category is out of respect, and this is the kind of classic example of Buddhism here, is for the Sangha. So maybe you make a donation to the Sangha, or say maybe you make a donation to the Buddha. Now, in a certain way, the Buddha doesn't necessarily need that donation. The Buddha will probably be fine if you don't give it to him. But when we give to the Sangha, it does benefit them, but that's not the main point. It's actually, in a sense, more for ourselves. The field of respect is usually for recipients who have very great virtue, very great wisdom, and when we give to them, we actually greatly benefit ourselves. It's almost a case of benefiting yourself. Now, when you give to people out of compassion, you still do benefit yourselves. It's not to say that there's no self-benefit as a result from the field of compassion. But when you give, it's something like giving a gift to a teacher. I remember when I was a kid, I don't know if they still do this nowadays. As a kid in New Zealand, end of the year, you'd always buy a little gift. Well, usually it was our mum and dad that would buy a gift for the teacher. You take it and give it to the teacher. I remember my mum's a primary school teacher, and at the end of the year she'd always come home with like a huge pile of like soap. It was always this thing like, buy soap for your primary school teacher. That would almost be like stock up on soap for the year. It was very sweet. Now, the teacher doesn't need the soap. They've got soap at home. It's fine. But it's something that we do out of respect and out of gratitude. And because the teacher is they're a virtuous person. Primary school teachers really do care for their kids. They're kind of like their surrogate parents while the kids are at school, right? It's a great responsibility. And so that's the field of respect. They don't really need it, but we do it because we have respect for what they've done, for their kindness, for their wisdom, for their compassion. And that's the field of respect. Okay, so these are two basic groups of people, shall we say, that we give to. Now the third line is even a bit more tricky. The differences of the mental state, the field, and the gift. Now this is often described with a metaphor, and I'd like to talk about that metaphor. It's tied up in the word, the field. So, any act of karma actually has a good analogy in the planting of a seed in a field. I think last week I talked about how I don't like using the metaphor or the analogy of like a bank account for merit. This idea that sort of like, you do a good deed, it's like putting money in the bank. You do a bad deed, it's like taking money out of the bank. And you want to be in credit, not in debit. You want to be in the black, not in the red. But the problem with this idea, of course, is that they cancel each other out, right? Putting in money and taking money out cancel each other out. But merit and karma doesn't really work like that. You do a bad deed, it doesn't get nullified by a good deed. There might be some interaction, but they don't just cancel out like that. So this idea of like planting in the field, it's a very old agricultural metaphor. It's easy to understand. It's kind of actually quite rich and complex, and I think it's a good way of describing it. So, I've got a little allotment garden here. So you want to plant something in a garden. Well, do you have a good plot for a start? Is that nice rich soil, or is it really a horrible sandy soil? Is the soil being poisoned by some oil spill or chemical spill? Right? There's a whole different range of possibilities. That's the field and that's the recipient. Now, a good rich field that's very fertile is a metaphor for someone who's very virtuous. A gift made to a virtuous person leads to a greater result than a gift made to an unvirtuous person. Keep in mind though, now even an unvirtuous person, even an animal, a gift made even to an animal or an unvirtuous person still has merit. It's not that it's no merit, or it's not that it's like negative merit. No. It's still good. It's still better to give to an unvirtuous person than to not give at all, for example. Or to give to an animal than to not give at all. But if we give to a good virtuous person, a good kind person, it's a better result. Now you can think about this yourself. Sometimes you just have some good friends. You do like a small favor for them, and they're like, I'm forever indebted to you. And they will spend their life like doing good things for you, and they'll always refer back to like one time you helped them. I mean, that's a good person. I mean, then there's other people that you do good things for them and they kind of forget about it, or they're doing the reverse. They're constantly saying, I helped you one time and therefore you've got to help me like forever in the future. Yeah, sort of like that's the not very rich, the not very fertile field. So that's the field. That's one thing. Now, of course, when you're growing a garden, you've got the field. You've also got the seed. What is it that the seed? Now, the seed is the gift itself. What is it that you're giving? So the type of gift also leads to the kind of result. You plant pumpkin seeds, you're going to get pumpkins. You're generous with food. Your result is going to come back with receiving more food, right? And this is also an important idea to keep in mind, just with the whole idea of karma, is that like cause leads to like result. I want to mention this because often people will say things like, I'm having difficulty in my studies, I want to get better grades. And you go to the temple and kind of people who don't really know that much about Buddhism, very keen, very devoted, but don't really know that much about it. They'll say like, oh, prostrate to the Buddha more, buy for, make more prostrations to the Buddha. Prostrations to the Buddha out of respect will develop our faith and will develop respect, but it won't necessarily or very directly lead to better success in your studies. You want to have better success in your studies, you have to do merit that's related to your studies, like helping other people in their studies, for example. Right? You want to do well in your class at school, university. If you can get together with some of your classmates, form a little study group where you're helping them, they'll also be helping you, right? That's the sort of karma you want that's going to get to a better grade. Supporting other people in their studies, helping other people with their textbooks, giving other people the time they need to prepare for the classes and whatever. Okay, so that's the gift. And then you've also got the mental state. When we're acting, that mental state was also really important. So when we make a gift and we do it like with respect, and we do it out of kindness and love, and we're happy about it and we rejoice in that, that is kind of like all these other good factors. That's like your extra fertilizer and the sunlight and the rain that helps this seed grow. If we give sort of grudgingly, if we give and then we have like regrets, if we give and then we just kind of ignore that gift and we don't fully support it, I mean, that seed will grow but not as strongly, right? So you've got all these elements that kind of come together. There can be a big difference between, let's say I give $10. Do I give $10 to, I don't know, I buy $10 worth of cat food and give it to stray cats out on my street? Do I give $10 worth of, I don't know, just a $10 donation to Oxfam that does charity work? Do I give a $10 donation to my local, the Oxford Buddha Vihara? Okay. Do I do one when I'm like, I give out of great respect, I'm very happy to make this generation? Or do I also like throw away money? Here, have your money. Scatter it on the table in front of them. There's my generosity. Or do we sort of like, here, I'm going to buy this cat food and you cats, leave me alone. I never want to see you again. Very different states of mind. Okay, so there's kind of like a whole big range of different things. It's all a $10, £10 donation, but who I'm giving it to, my state of mind while I'm giving, the actions that I do while I'm giving, and all these supported things are going to line 4. The merit can be distinguished as superior or inferior, right? So there can be a big range of different results from those. And, again, if we can use this this metaphor of growing a plant, and I think I talked about this earlier when we were talking about karma. You got one seed. Imagine you got one seed. How much crop can you get out of that one seed? I mean, there's no simple answer, right? I remember this year I was growing squash. I wanted to grow some squash, but I only had about 4 seeds. So I was like super careful when planting them, and I really babied them and made sure every seed came up and made sure they got to like a good healthy size. And I was really careful about when I planted them out in the garden because I didn't want it too cold. I didn't want too cold and then they die in the cold because squash don't like the cold. And I didn't want it too wet because then the slugs will come and eat them. Because I grow all organic and I don't use any like slug bait or anything like that. Now compared to some other things where I've got like so many seeds, I scatter them and like a whole bunch of them come up and some of them die. I don't really care. Where am I going with this metaphor? The cause and the result, what's the correlation? It's really hard to say. I mean, if you could have one squash seed and grow and give it so much care and attention and perfectly like lovely earth for it to grow in, and you put in the best spot, the best sunshine, you make sure it gets the right amount of light, you keep the bugs off it. I mean, you could grow this monster squash that, you've got like a dozen 5-kilo squash, and if you harvested all those, you could be pulling out 1,000 seeds. Or you could plant it and not really do a good job, and that little squash could just die before a first leaf or two pops out. So we need to make sure that when we do these good deeds, and generosity is no exception, another form of merit, that we nurture it, we look after it, we develop it, we let it, come to the best result. Now this is all part of this whole big process of what we call causes and conditions, and knowing those specifically is really important. The next, I think we're going to maybe wrap up here today. The next verse is talking about, again, some more details. Okay, maybe let's just do it. Let's just jump in and have a look at this next line here. It's fairly straightforward. Okay, so verse 47. 师应如法师，勿随自不报，求报即习先。西天要明等。Giving should be done according to the Dharma. Do not give from pressure, from fear, to repay, seeking results from mere tradition, for divine privilege or out of fame and so forth. So, giving should be according to the Dharma. Now that's kind of what I've been talking about, of like, when we do it with respect. You can give to a homeless person or a needy person and make them feel good about it, or you can make them feel bad about it. Sometimes people, one of the reasons people don't like receiving charity is that they've been made to feel like inferior or made to feel bad about that, being humiliated when people get generous. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can be generous to people, give them something nice and respect them in that. And that really comes down to our attitude. So that attitude is like super important. It's as important or more important than the actual gift that we're giving, right? Often if I give to, maybe see a homeless person on the street, unfortunately too many of them in the UK, I always try to say a few kind words. I don't often, it's just in passing. I feel I don't have time to like stop and talk to them or help them in a greater way, which is something I kind of regret. But say something kind to them, bless them, hope they can work a way out of that problem. These are all the ways of giving according to the Dharma, in a good way, in a proper way, for the benefit of yourself and others. And then a list of ways how not to do it, like when people are pressuring us, giving out of pressure or out of fear. Like the mafia, make a donation to me or your business will blow up from a Molotov cocktail, and then you give. That's not really giving, right? That's out of fear, because remember the karmic force, the most important thing there is that state of mind, and out of fear, and action out of fear, it's not what we want. Likewise, to repay, if you're just repaying something, also it's not really a gift, is it? It's transactional. If we're trying to seek the result, we're simply giving to get like a result, like I'll do something good for you and you're going to do something good for me. That's pretty low on the level of giving, right? That's also transactional. Out of mere tradition, just something that like, this has always been done like this. Yeah, but what's the state of mind? It's just, there's no positive state of mind there. For divine privilege, or so this is the idea of appeasing the gods. Basically, you appease the gods and the gods will look after you. Again, that is often also out of fear or out of fame. You give just so that you can have your name up in lights and people can say, oh, you're such a generous person. Now, you don't necessarily have to avoid that. There's a bit of a question about, when we are generous, We don't have to go, oh, look, I'm so generous, look at me. But we don't also have to do it like totally secretly either. Sometimes, again, it comes down to how to do it skillfully. You can say, well, I gave to this group and I support this group. And sometimes that can encourage others to also be generous as well. So long as you don't make it about yourself, right? You make it about the people who are benefiting, and you try to encourage others to do it as well. So these are some sort of bad factors that might come into it. But really in the end, it comes down to that state of mind, that positive state of mind, that generosity, being able to relinquish, give up that thing so we're no longer clinging to it and are seeking to benefit the recipient. These are some of the key actions of generosity, and that is the first of the 3 meritorious actions: generous giving, morality and ethics, particularly like the 5 precepts, etc. And then last but not least, meditation or development. And we're going to be talking about those 2 in the next couple of classes. But for now, let's wrap it up here. Thank you for joining us at Bodhi Tree Buddhism, and we're going to see you again next week. Bye-bye.